Good afternoon. Nice to be with you. It's 42 degrees or so, and it feels pretty comfortable. I think it's because the sunlight is out. It teaches you to be warm, even when you're not. Okay. That's the end of my conspiracy theory segment of this conversation. I want to thank all of you who followed or commented on either the show last night with Ari about the faux investigation run by Barr and Durham, basically to uncover that the Russian investigation was phony when the investigation of the investigation was phony and fraudulent and overlooked information about misconduct by Trump and his financial dealings, and the source was Italian. So their investigation led to information about Trump, and they didn't do anything about it. They also prosecuted a case. It was a bullshit case in which the fellow was acquitted. Should have never been brought. And on top of that, they authorized the NSA to look into stuff at the CIA. These guys just are clumsy as could be, and hopefully somebody will investigate them. So we did that. And then after that, Ari and I caught a car and went over to the venue to do a discussion about his foreword summing up the January 6th committee report. And that was fascinating, and it was great fun to meet maybe some of you who are listening to this. And I only wish I had all the selfies that were taken, so because some people I hadn't seen in ages, it was just a kick. So thank you one and all. The news today has taken a turn toward this miserable, horrific beating of Tyre Nichols, 29. He was a very slight man, and apparently it had to do with some motorist violation. I don't know. He tried to run away from the cops or whatever. And but 5 men kicked him, assaulted him, tasered him until he was dead. And last I checked, that's not a penalty for even having a car chase to catch someone. What in a way makes it worse is a black-on-black crime, meaning that the 5 officers were black. So does that mean the calamitous ethos that is embraced by the police has even captured some persons of color whom you would think would be resistant, as occurs in other places? Well, they were all fired, they're all in jail, and they're being charged with second-degree murder. And sometime today, 6 o'clock, so depending on when this gets posted, the video of this horrific beating will be available to the public. And as some have said, you don't need to see that. The question is, were they charged so quickly because they weren't white officers? It's a terrible question to ask, but it's a fair one in these days. I'm glad to hear that Biden is banning mining in the Minnesota wilderness. That's good. Of course, what he gives with one hand, he takes with the other. If there's an emergency going on right now, it's the Colorado River and the states that can't agree how they're going to reduce their use of water, which is at such a low level. Pictures make it look like it was a wasteland where once there was water covering that wasteland. So that's a pretty sickening sight. Among the bad news, which is inexplainable, is that despite all we know, and despite the January 6th report and everything, Trump is returning to Facebook and is pushing to return, although he denies it, he's pushing to return to Twitter as well, so that he can raise money and raise his profile. So all these people are doing the same thing that happened the first time. He arose, came down his golden elevator, or escalator, excuse me. They're both gold, I think, and announced for office in a spewing session of hate and discriminatory remarks. So here we are again, when we said that that would mean anything and it would die in the cradle. He became president and did everything wrong he could possibly do. Yesterday during our meeting, it was a point of discussion, and I was asked about how I characterized the people, and I characterized Trump as evil. That is beyond ethics, law, and the Constitution. Just a brutal animal who will do anything to win and doesn't care about the consequences. And given a track record of crime that for some reason our prosecutors can't figure out how to charge, this man's running for president again, and he's building and getting stronger, even as we should be filing an indictment against him. It's pretty remarkable, don't you think? The violence that's happening in our political dialogue is not to be envied, not to be cherished. It needs to be stopped, but I believe that it won't unless we start enforcing the law and making people accountable so they get anxious about what might happen to them individually. I'm thinking of Pelosi. Pelosi is still recovering from this hammer attack to his head, and that's no small thing. He's not a young man. I think he's 80. So this is really a terrible crime, and I don't know what influence it had on Pelosi stepping down as Speaker. I think she was planning to step down as Speaker, but there it is. You just don't know in politics, and I don't expect to hear it from her. Today is a day of remembrance. We should be thinking about another time and mass horrible abuses of humankind based on the fact that people were Jewish, but also those who opposed a corrupt, hateful, arrogant, imperialistic regime. This is a day that we remember the Holocaust, and there's a lot of focus on Auschwitz. I've never been there, but in 1969, when I took a motorcycle around Europe, I was in Munich, and not far from there is Dachau. And I took my motorcycle out, and it was a fairly quiet day, and there were only a couple of people there at the site. And you go through a door that says Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free. And of course, it's one of those ironies in which you're worked to death. So you're free of this life, I suppose. I could then speak some German because I'd studied it and had some small conversations. And when I drove away from the place on my bike, I came to a small town nearby, and they were having some sort of festival. And I had this feeling that somehow or other, these people couldn't be happy because of Dachau. And of course, this is a false expression given the propinquity of this place of horror with a place of happiness in a festival. And I think that's how we have to remember what happened at Dachau and Auschwitz, all the people who died in the Holocaust. Because in its various distasteful manifestations, it's always about us. And there's a famous phrase about how the Germans came for this one and that one, and how the person who's speaking said I didn't help them, and I didn't help them, and I didn't help them, and then they came for me, and there was no one to help me. We are in this life together, and there are a remarkably large minority of people who don't think so. But it is the only way to get through this life, to make it meaningful, to preserve what we can best of our joys, and to suffer through the pain of life. So on this day of remembrance, think of those you know who had this experience. If you're like me, you've met such people. You may have gone to the Holocaust Museum in DC. You may have been to one of these horrendous sites. You can probably look at pictures today and think that's what happens when the people don't find a way to bind themselves one to the other to fight evil. Yes, Trump is one kind of evil. He would overthrow our way of government, but he's not alone, and he has a lot of followers, and we can't lose sight of that. So we have to double our effort to give voice to freedom and how we achieve it. And no one really can be left out. At the least, that's what you have to do. So here I am in my cathedral of trees on a pretty nice day, and I look forward to talking to you tomorrow.